Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas. Some would consider the early 2000s as a dark period in animation. Not because the medium was in peril of dying or anything. In fact, it was starting to get really big with movies like Shrek, Ice Age, and the early Pixar films. However, with the rise of computer animation, it was also the downfall of mainstream hand-drawn animated features. Many of them at the time, like Titan AE, Treasure Planet, The Road to El Dorado, and more, ended up as box office bombs where people were getting the idea that hand-drawn is no longer profitable. When it comes to Sinbad, however, that was the straw that broke the camel's back, and when that movie nearly destroyed the entirety of DreamWorks animation, that was when Jeffrey Katzenberg vowed to never make another hand-drawn movie again. But when we look directly into the tale of Sinbad, did audiences miss the chance of an adventure of a lifetime? Or is it more than in the box office that it bombed? Let's find out. The story. Unlike the other traditionally animated features from DreamWorks, the story here focuses more on the journey that the characters go through more than about the characters themselves. The big mission of this movie is that Sinbad has to sail the seas to Tartamus in order to bring back the Book of Peace that was stolen by Ares. What is interesting to note is that the movie decided to take a step back from the original Arabic tale Sinbad is based on and instead apply some Greek mythology, including how a good chunk of the movie is taken place in Syracuse. While the element of the fantasy adventure and Sinbad fighting big monsters remains intact, I can imagine how it might throw some people off if they were expecting to come in and see, well, you know, Sinbad the Sailor. But anyways, going back to the feature, this is meant to be a lot more action-centered, where the perils and obstacles that Sinbad had to face is more of the star than it is the actual writing itself. I'm not saying that it's all about the action. It does have the courtesy to take some time into some of the characters and a bit of the story. However, a lot of the plot points do end up being rather cliched and gives the feature a bit of predictability. So the parts that you would see about, for example, the developing relationship between Sinbad and Marina aren't as effective as scenes like when they both have to escape the rock.
Okay, see, in the hands of an expert, a good knife has 1,001 uses. Ooh.
Okay, so the plot itself isn't as good. But what about the action? If it's the main component here, it must have done a good job, right? Oh, absolutely! I'll get more into it on the animation, but the action scenes certainly make this film highly engaging, and it's where the film's most creative aspects would appear. If there's anything that would be worth watching here, it's definitely for that. It may not be made to actually tell a story, but it can certainly deliver nonetheless. The animation. As the final hand-drawn animated feature from DreamWorks, or at least by the time this review was made, they certainly ended the use of traditional animation with a bang. The movie would use a mix of both 2D and 3D animation, where the characters were done in hand-drawn while everything else was made by computers. Starting with the characters, they all have a nice, realistic, but with a hint of a Disney look into them that also puts the effort of making each character look unique from one another, which can result in some fascinating designs, whether it be with someone that's more prominently shown or even an extra in the background. The one character that stands out the most visually would have to be Ares, especially with the way that she becomes mist every time that she moves, along with the powers that she can hold. She's easily one of the most creative elements of this feature. As for the use of computer animation, it can be a massive mix. This is during the time when the medium was still a new thing and the studio was experimenting how they could mix it with hand-drawn. Although some parts of it can work and the characters do fit well in their backgrounds, like in Syracuse or in Sinbad's boat, on top of applying some nice details, but then there are moments like with some monsters and the water effects where it's almost embarrassing how you could tell that this is early CGI. It doesn't help either when the characters would suddenly become computer animated when they're far back. But now let's go back to those action scenes. The two things that really make them great are the choreography of either the escape or the fight, and the grand scale that Sinbad and his crew has to face. Whether it be fighting giant monsters or just to get out of a nasty situation, it really does know how to use the camera to really grab us onto the adventure and bring out the best in the character animation, like whenever they have to use their swords. Although it might need some more work with the CGI, the animation pulls through as a strong component for this feature. The characters. As it is more about the journey and the action, the characters won't be as thoroughly developed or complex like in DreamWorks' previous traditional works, like with Moses and Ramses in The Prince of Egypt, or Tulio and Miguel in The Road to El Dorado. Conceptually, these characters can be easily described, with many of them follow a simple trope. There's Sinbad, who's trying to be the wisecracking jerk that loves stealing and adventure. Marina is the strong, independent woman that would later become the love interest. Proteus is the high-class friend that believes that Sinbad is a good man. And Ares is the manipulative villain who has a more seductive tone. Honestly, it's simple as that. Of course, there are other characters that play a smaller part, like Sinbad's crew, which features a colorful cast, and King Dimas, who clearly hates Sinbad, but wants to do everything he can to protect Proteus. However, this is one of those cases that conceptually they're uninteresting, but execution-wise, they work out pretty well. Thanks to some of the writing and the performances, like from Brad Pitt, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Michelle Pfeiffer, and many more, the characters would be far from hateable, and a few can have a nice backstory to flesh out their identity, like with Proteus and how his relationship with Sinbad can be rather interesting. Also, even with Sinbad's crew, some of them can stand out well with a unique ability or personality, like either Kale or Rat. But I will say that these things don't often work, especially with the relationship with Sinbad and Marina, where they go in the old predictable transition from hating and yelling at each other to just falling in love. This was easy to lay out right at the start when he first sees her.
Oh, what? Who is she?
An old girlfriend?
Afraid it's not that simple. Let's go.
On the bright side, at least there are no bad characters here. So with great performances onto some okay characters, at least the adventure is equipped with a decent crew. It may not be the best hand-drawn animated feature from DreamWorks, but they still did a pretty good job with it. Sinbad Legend of the Seven Seas is an enjoyable adventure with a lot of great action, creative animation, and some nice voice acting. Despite the story and characters having some predictability and some unattractive computer animation, it is still an overall fun experience. If you're like Sinbad and you're just seeking for adventure with giant monsters, exploring new worlds, and sword fighting, this would be worth a watch. However, if you want a more authentic Sinbad experience, there are two ways to go that are better than this. For a Sinbad movie, you should go with Ray Harryhausen's Sinbad trilogy. For an animated Sinbad, then stick with the most acclaimed Popeye cartoon, Popeye Meets Sinbad the Sailor. It may not have sailed well with DreamWorks, but I'm sure some audiences will rediscover this and enjoy its treasures. Hey guys, this is AniMat. I just want to start things off by giving a huge thanks to Brian, aka Red Bandit 101, for his amazing support on Patreon, in which one of the rewards that he got was this review of Sinbad, Legend of the Seven Seas. Now, with that said though, even though, as of this review at the very least, that Sinbad is technically the final DreamWorks animated feature in which that it is traditionally animated, it wouldn't necessarily be the last time that DreamWorks would ever touch upon hand-drawn animation. I mean, yes, technically there are a few other elements like animation references that they would continue to use in order to understand the movements of the characters. And then there is also the 2D shows that would go on Netflix, rather it be of like Turbo, Peabody and Sherman, or Dawn of the Croods. Like, they still would use hand-drawn animation to this day, but not necessarily in the form that we know, like using it as a medium in order to create movies. But there are some times that DreamWorks did try to incorporate hand-drawn onto their feature films. Not use it as the main medium like their previous films, you know, use it in the same style as like Prince of Egypt, El Dorado, Spirit, or Sinbad, but mostly just incorporating hand-drawn onto some computer animated features. And probably the best example was actually a canceled project known as Me and My Shadow, where everything would be done in computer animation, but the shadow itself would have been hand-drawn animated. And even if you go and check out online, there are a few examples that you would see with some test animations that would actually feature the hand-drawn animated shadow. But unfortunately, due to some technical issues and production being pushed back and back, it would inevitably just end up being canceled at DreamWorks. So, like, just the concept of that idea of making something that would mix hand-drawn and computer animation in that style, it didn't fully come into fruition. But that doesn't mean that DreamWorks would ever give up using hand-drawn animation onto their films. In fact, if you look at the Kung Fu Panda films, there are actually a lot of times in which they would use traditional animation, or at least 2D animation, in order to present just a few scenes, like some flashbacks. And like I said before, Kung Fu Panda provides some great examples. Like in the first one, like with the major intro with Poe's dream, or even in the second one when you see those flashbacks of like Poe's origins, of how like his last moment with his biological mother. And even in the third film, when you actually look into the backstory of Master Oogway, and I believe Kai is the character. I think either way, I'll probably correct it somewhere over here. But yeah, you guys get what I mean. Like, even though that DreamWorks may not, or eventually will never actually make a fully traditional animated feature in the way that many people would probably want, they are still using hand-drawn animation. It is not dead at DreamWorks Animation, that is for sure. But anyways, now that Sinbad is finally done, it is now time that we go and move on to the animation hat. And just want to mention right now, if you guys would like to be like Red Bandit 101 and you want to go and support my work and at the same time get some awesome rewards, then all you have to do is go to patreon.com/animat. However, if you guys would still like to request me an animated film that you would like me to review and I would put onto the animation hat, then all you have to do is write me an email at animatsreviews@gmail.com. Okay, so, with all that, okay, well, never mind. I can't even finish a sentence and already it just gave me a paper. So, with all that said, the next review shall be... Oh, wow. Oh, this can actually be really interesting. Yes, okay. Okay, so we actually got a pretty fascinating movie to check out. I mean, this is pretty much the movie that was pretty much set right in the middle when Disney was at their biggest, and then this came in and Disney was expecting that this is going to be like their biggest movie ever, but what came out of it? Well, this.
Enough talking. Time for some screaming.